A mushroom farmer once said that life sometimes feels like the mushrooms that he's growing in his long, dark barns. See, you're in the dark for a long period of time. Then someone comes around every once in a while and sprinkles some manure on you. When finally your head pops up through the manure, they cut it off and you're canned. Sometimes life in this world can be a great struggle. Once again today in our gospel lesson, we are called to examine and evaluate the divine things and the human things. Honestly, I love this gospel lesson, and I love to preach on this text. I'm never ever at a loss for things to preach on when we get to this gospel lesson. See, we know that the world in which we live is filled with all sorts of struggle between the good and the bad, between light and darkness, between hope and despair, between life and death. The human things and the divine. And every single time this text comes up, I only need to look at the week's headlines to find those human things that we struggle with, that cause so much despair and so much pain in our lives. Just look at the last week we lived through. Grim and pretty disappointing. As if the 11th anniversary of September 11th wasn't enough on Tuesday, then came the news that the American embassy in Libya was attacked by terrorists. Ambassador Chris Stevens was killed along with 3 others. A harsh and stark reminder to us that the world is not a very safe place, that terrorism is real. The human things. And as that was going on, you've got that continued political posturing by our presidential candidates and the political parties about what's right, what's wrong. And in the midst of that, you always seem to have to ask the question, does anyone have our interests in mind? Or is it all about who's going to have the power? The human thing. Then we've got Mayor Bloomberg, who seems to have nothing better to do but to worry about the size of the soft drinks that we drink. Now the problem with this is, once again, it's an infringement on our freedoms, and I think it's an insult to our intelligence and our ability to govern ourselves and take care of our own lives. The human things. Meanwhile, in that same city, there's a 74-year-old senior citizen who in broad daylight is sexually assaulted in Central Park. The human things. I could go on and on. I'm sure there's other things you'd like to add to the list, but I think we get the point. Sometimes the world in which we live is not a very friendly or happy place, and sometimes it feels like manure is being sprinkled all over us. Now, the common thread that ties together all of our readings for today is, first of all, a recognition of the despair and the pain that so often comes to us by the human things. And then secondly, words of encouragement and direction to help us to deal with the human things, the sin and the brokenness that surrounds us in this world. In our first reading, the Old Testament reading from Proverbs, we continue to get that wisdom of Solomon. And this one comes along and talks about those exact 2 things. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel and despised all my reproof, therefore they shall eat fruit of their way and be sated with their own devices. For waywardness kills the simple, and the complacency of fools destroys them. Follow the human things. Trust completely in the human things. It's not always a very happy path. But on the other side is the encouragement. Those who listen to me will be secure and will live at ease without dread of disaster. The divine peace. Hope for something more. Then the psalmist, as we spoke together today, reminded us of that wisdom of God by saying, the teaching of the Lord is perfect and revives the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure and gives wisdom to the simple. As you live life uncertain, as you live in the midst of this world of pain, the wisdom of the Lord always gives hope. Then James. James takes a little bit different approach for us today. See, James recognizes that there's enough around us in this world with the human things that makes our lives hard enough that we really don't have to help ourselves. He is acutely aware of the dangers of the human tongue. And I think most of us, by our own experience in life, realize how sometimes we can undermine our own faith and our own integrity by speaking out of both sides of our mouth, by saying the things that we probably shouldn't be saying as people who call upon the divine. The Journal of Clinical Microbiology writes a report that there's probably 500 or so different germs that reside on the back of our tongue every single day. And that our tongue is in need just as much of cleansing as our teeth. And James picks up on that theme a little bit more. That in a spiritual sense, the same kind of germs can come out of our mouth, making the human things and human relationships that much more difficult, and we need a constant spiritual cleansing. The bit and the bridle that he talked about in the lesson. But it's that gospel lesson and that shocking encounter between Jesus and Peter that really drives home the point for us today. I love Peter. I am so thankful that Jesus chose Peter to be one of his apostles. Because Peter is that guy. He wants to be right. He wants to be the star student. He wants to be that great servant. He always wants to be the first to have the right answer of faith. And he tries over and over and over again. And over again we see with Peter how the human things, the frailty of the human flesh gets in the way. And even though Peter wanted to say the right thing and do the right thing, get behind me, Satan, is what Jesus has to say. And Jesus says this because he needs to go on and explain how living in the divine, how being a servant and follower of Jesus is not a half-hearted, part-time effort. How it's a lifestyle. It's a full commitment. And Jesus uses Peter's words and this example because he knows how important this is for us to focus on the divine things. He realizes how so often it is so difficult for us on our own to get through the things of this world. How the human things trip us up, cause us pain, and get in the way. And he knows that we need hope, and all too often, that hope can't be found in the things of the world. It can't be found in the human things. When this world is spinning out of control, when we don't know where to turn, is it the human things? No. The divine things? Yes. When we see how fragile life is and how quickly it can be lost, do we find comfort in the human things? No. The divine things? Yes. When our worldly leaders fail us and disappoint us, where do we turn for leadership, true leadership? The human things? No. The divine things? Yes. And when we see senseless violence that destroys life and the peace that surrounds us, where do we turn to find the hope of a better life yet to come, something greater? The human things? No. The divine things? Yes. I know every single one of us wants to be like Peter, to say the right things, to do the right things, to be those great people of faith. But we are acutely aware of the fact that we ourselves struggle with sin. We are part of that human problem. We are the ones that, even though time and time again we want to do the right things, sometimes the wrong thing comes out of our mouth or comes out of our lives. And that's why God meets us here in this sacred space with his divine gifts over and over again. He knows how hard it is, and he wants us to find that peace and hope that can't be found in the things of this world. That's why he encounters us with the power of his word, the words of wisdom like Proverbs, the words of encouragement like the Psalms, the words of direction like James, and the Word incarnate himself, Jesus, who offers that salvation and resurrection that his cross and empty tomb gives to us. And the divine comes to us in this sacred meal, at this sacred table, in this place, to fill us with his power and his peace in the midst of those times when our human flesh limits us and disappoints us. And so in the midst of this world, where the brokenness of sin, the human things often bring us down, the divine things, the gifts of God's power, presence, and peace, always give us hope and comfort.